Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maureen with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Center. Welcome to our Wednesday series on how to apply a value stream map to your business. Before we get started, please make sure your microphone is muted and your camera is turned off. We just find that it's easier if we just type in questions in the chat box. We'll probably save questions to the end. And with me today is one of our staff engineers, David King, and he will be presenting on this webinar. So I will turn the time over to David.
All right, thank you so much, Maureen. Again, my name is David King, and I am a staff engineer at the MEP Center here at the University of Utah. So recently we've had a lot of requests for value stream maps with some of our clients, so we thought it would be a good idea to kind of kick things off with a webinar on really, what is a value stream map? We're going to take a look at the process that we follow with our clients. Also, what things you should be looking for in your business or your organization. And then at the end, we'll brainstorm some ideas for your different organizations. So to give you a little bit of info about myself, like I said, I'm an engineer here at the MEP Center. I've had the opportunity to work with many different clients and actually execute some value stream maps with them. The commodities you see with those different companies there varies pretty greatly. So we've worked with food manufacturers or defense contractors or folks working in electronics. But really the idea with a value stream map is it doesn't matter what your industry is or whether or not it's like a true, tried and true like manufacturing operation or it's more transactional. Value stream maps are going to apply in either case. So there's, on the right-hand side is kind of my like cheesy joke of the day. In my mind, streams that have the most value are also filled with some mountain trout. So that's a photo of me up in the Logan Canyon area doing some fishing last season. To start things off, before we dive into what a value stream map is, I wanted to share with you what a finished product looks like. So this is a formal and kind of polished version of a value stream map. The key pieces here is there's plenty of data. We see with each process there's some cycle time, there's some a percentage uptime with the different processes. So lots of data is tracked here. And we also know where the information's going. So information flows is a huge piece with a value stream map, as well as a lead time ladder. This piece is what we use from a pretty high level to understand the difference between our production lead time and our processing time. So in other words, how long does it take for our customer to receive the product that they asked for, and how much of that time is spent actually working on the product. So the key to a value stream map is what types of these processes and what pieces in this process are actually adding value to the client or our customer. We want to make sure that whatever piece we're doing in our process, it's actually something the customer's looking for, or indeed finds value in it. So that's where it gets its name, from a value stream map. It is no mystery to manufacturers today that a VSM is a tool for continuous improvement. These events typically last between 3 to 5 days, and they involve a very well-rounded group. So we always encourage our clients and whoever's doing a value stream map to engage folks from the shop floor, folks from departments that might not quite relate to the process, but might be able to add some additional opinions and some additional thoughts. When we do a VSM, we're going to focus on specific measurement standards. So whatever your goal is in terms of where you want to see yourself, we're going to look at improving maybe your quality or your cycle time or your staffing numbers, but all those items have some quantitative aspect to them. Overall, a value stream map is going to be key in reducing waste, fostering new ideas, and helping your organization become more process-oriented. We deal with a lot of clients where their process is more product-centric. They're kind of like a job shop maybe, or they're focused on just getting the next item out the door. This exercise can help clients to become more process-oriented. Like I mentioned earlier, a value stream map, where it gets its name, is in terms of kind of what you do is you're always looking to add value for your customer. So that goes over what a value stream map is. When we look at the process and the steps that we follow, it starts with some training. So the center here will begin by doing a brief overview with the team that's going to be involved with the value stream map. And one of the topics we talk about is the 8 wastes. There's an acronym that's pretty common in the industry today called downtime. It stands for the 8 most common wastes. It starts with defects, there's overproduction, waiting, non-utilized ideas and people, transportation, inventory, motion, and excess processing. All of these items are typically not things your customer would be willing to pay for. So we're going to always keep an eye out for these pieces. Once we've covered training with that group, we want to go ahead and identify the SMART goals for the project. This is something we do at the center in order to make sure we're going to be on target and get a solution that the team's very happy with in the end. But like any good business owner or someone in operations understands that without making goals specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, they're most likely not going to get accomplished. So making a goal specific, we want to make sure it applies to the area we're focused on. Measurable, you'll hear me say quantitative over and over throughout this presentation. And that's really important in terms of the VSM to make sure we're quantifying how we're obtaining our goals. We want to make sure it's achievable. We're not really trying to come up with pie-in-the-sky solutions or something that's not achievable or can be really assignable. So we need to make sure it's there. And likewise, we need to make sure it's relevant. The goal needs to be relevant to the individual and the organization and relate back to the project we're working on. Then, just like any other goal, we need to make sure there's some time-bound specifications applied to that goal. So we start with some SMART goals. Once we've identified those, we move on to identify the voice of the customer. And it's really important to understand that sometimes the SMART goals could be a portion of our customer, but sometimes you have some internal goals, like some cost reduction or some waste savings that you're trying to accomplish that don't necessarily speak to exactly what your customer wants. So we make sure to capture both those when we do a VSM. When we are identifying the voice of the customer, this is really where we get into the meat of a value stream map. I mentioned that a value stream map is really where we're trying to identify what pieces in our process are adding value to our client. And we need to understand what our client really wants. So a good question to ask yourself here is will your customer pay or wait for whatever you're about to do? We look at it in terms of time, quality, cost, and really try to understand what their expectations are. When we move through this process, we want to first identify our customer. They could be internal, they could be external. Sometimes they're upstream, downstream. Wherever they might lie, we want to identify them and find out where they're at. Then we want to understand, what do they value? What are they going to appreciate? What do they want to see in their product? And then is there anything else that's required? Is something required because of a regulation, or is it simply mandated in the industry you're in? An interesting tool to kind of use and play with here is if your customer is over your shoulder, would they be willing to pay for the task you're doing right now? Would they insert another dollar bill into the machine to make sure it stays working? So that's a good technique to use. But when we talk about the voice of the customer, we want to make sure we're talking about value-added and non-value-added work. Like I mentioned earlier, we want to understand what the customer is willing to pay us to do. And that in itself is value-added work. Non-value-added work is everything else. Unfortunately, sometimes we need to build non-value-added work into our process, so that would be something regulatory or required by your industry. But in general, we break it down into those two pieces and want to reduce as much non-value-added work as possible and increase the amount of value-added work. Some additional questions we can ask when we're talking about the voice of our customer is, has this activity been requested by the customer? Do they really want it? We once ran into a scenario where a product was being painted a specific color, and sure enough, everybody in the facility thought that it needed to be that color, but when in fact the customer didn't care what color it was. And so the company was sweating and really worried about making sure that this color was exactly right when the customer didn't care at all. We also want to make sure that, does this activity physically change or add value to the information or product? That's something really important to keep in mind, that these value stream maps not only apply to situations similar to making widgets or on a manufacturing floor, but also in the front office. We recently worked with a customer to reanalyze their order fulfillment process, where we try to reduce as much waste as possible. And another simple example is someone in the healthcare industry. How many times have you been sitting in a waiting room, ready for your appointment, and they keep asking you the same questions that you just answered on your last site visit? Is that really the most effective way for them to process you through the system? How many times does it need to be documented that you have these particular illnesses, or you're not allergic to these things? Sometimes it's really redundant, and those are messy processes. So the important piece to take away there is these value stream maps can be applied to things that are physical, or also digital and more on the information or transactional side of things. Once we've identified our voice of the customer, we move on to identifying the current process. This is where the actual mapping comes in. We have an example here of a team on the right-hand side that was assembled. You've got folks from the front office all the way down to the shop floor, and they're going through and labeling each step in the process. So when we look at preparing the current state and getting it up, a lot of times on the walls of a conference room, we want to make sure we've selected that process. We've already identified the voice of the customer. That cross-functional team has then been assembled and begins to map out the process, each step that's involved. Value-add and non-value-added work is then evaluated. We want to make sure we're looking at each one of these steps from the lens of our customer, so to speak. So is the customer willing to pay for these pieces, or are they not? Once we've identified the current process, we move on to Kaizen ideas. This is where some of the best takeaways happen from a value stream map. Kaizen Burst and the Kaizen ideas is a brainstorming activity that's placed physically on top of the value stream map. Here at the center, to kind of improve some engagement and get people excited, we use these star-shaped sticky notes, as you can see in these examples. And anyone is encouraged to place ideas up on the board. So they could be totally far-fetched ideas or very practical, easy to obtain ideas. And everyone is encouraged to go up there and voice their opinion. We then take those stars and we place them on an impact versus complexity grid, which is used to prioritize these activities into 4 separate quadrants. So as you can imagine, there's going to be some projects that are very high impact, but don't require too much input. So those high impact, low complexity items are going to be the ones that you want to accomplish first. An example of some of those might be simply just a metric board at your facility. Increasing the amount of visual management or knowledge you have on the floor is a pretty simple thing to do, typically, but it has a high impact. Something that's low in impact but high in complexity is probably a back burner project, or might not even happen because you have other things to focus on. But what this grid does is allows you to prioritize those items and then start checking them off and assigning them. Once we've come up with our ideas, we then arrive at the future state. So this is where we take some of those Kaizen ideas and start to either remove steps or change steps, but we're also looking to use other continuous improvement methods to address really what's going on. We want to use the data we have collected on all of these cards and within all of these steps, but we want to avoid analysis paralysis. We want to use the data, but also use our gut feeling and make sure the team is confident that that's the correct step to go forward. You'll hear things like a 5 why or a fishbone diagram. These are going to try to address root cause because naturally there are problems and questions that pop up throughout the process, and people want to understand really what's going on or why are these steps being taken, why is there effort being placed into this process when we don't really know why we're doing it. So maybe that's time for a 5 why. There are other techniques like using an A3 method or a PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, that we've also used in the past. So that goes over the value stream map process. And now I want to take a look at a little bit more realistically, like what things should you be looking for within your business? Anytime there's a dramatic increase in demand, so if your customer all of a sudden has doubled their orders and you're having a hard time fulfilling those, that would be a great time to take a look at doing a value stream map. We see this pretty often too. Teams that throw it over the wall. A lot of times a design team or a quality team might throw something over the wall, so to speak, over into operations lap and say, deal with it. Whenever that communication is lacking, we always encourage our clients to do a value stream map. Whenever a particular process is overstaffed or overprocessed, sometimes as an operations manager, you have that gut feeling that you just know there's too many people out on the floor. Well, a value stream map really lets you quantify that and understand where most of the people are and where it might make sense to remove some of that overstaffing or overprocessing that you're doing. Anytime you're not meeting your customers' demands, so if they're asking for something and you're not able to deliver on that, let's understand why. Let's get to the root cause and start using some of those techniques to really drive down and figure out what's happening. All of these are good things to look for within your organization and try to keep an eye out for in terms of when it might make sense to have a value stream map. Now I'm going to suggest some ideas that we go over. This is somewhat of a brainstorming activity, but I'm going to pop up some questions for you to ask yourself and really see, does it make sense for you to do a VSM right now? So what does your customer really want? Do you understand that, and are you delivering that? Or maybe do you need to reflect a little bit closer on what they're asking for and understand their needs so that you can waste less time delivering something that they might not really want? Does everyone on your team know their role? This is a big one. A lot of times you have a room full of firefighters that are they're willing to do whatever they want to get the product out the door, but does everyone know their place and their role? A value stream map might help you with that communication and help to assign those roles. If you have a goal to reduce costs in 2018, I'm sure everyone has a goal to reduce their costs, whether it's this year or next year or for the next decade. But what's your plan and what are your priorities to really do that? I mentioned that Kaizen activity, which happens towards the end of the value stream map. That gives you a whole list of what to go and tackle, ideas that can improve your process and speed things up or improve your quality piece. And that helps you prioritize some of those items to hopefully reduce some of your costs in 2018. So with that, Maureen, I want to open it up for some questions to the group. If anyone has any questions out there, I encourage you to type them into the text box, the chat box, and we'll see how those come in and give them a few minutes to come in, and then I'll try my best to answer those for you. So far, we haven't had anyone submit any questions. Without that, if anyone has a question, please do it, and we'll give it a couple more minutes here. Okay, looks like nobody has any questions for the rest of the discussion, but if you do think of something or if you are interested in doing a value stream map at your business, I encourage you to reach out to the MEP Center here. Looks like we just had a question come in. Hang on just a second. The question is, do you see a lot of custom job shops using the data tables like CT? We do. We see a lot of, hang on one second. Maureen's going to try to get our presentation back up, but I will keep talking as she does this. So we do see a lot of job shops using data tables to show how closely, mostly it's showing how close they are to being on their production schedule. So we've seen these production boards, a lot of times they'll have safety as a number one, quality as a number two, delivery as a number three. and in that order. Does that answer your question? Hopefully. It's a little bit difficult to try to communicate with folks through the chat box, but best way we've come up with. So again, there's our contact information on the board. Oh, in terms of tack time, absolutely. So there's lots of different methods for this. One of the methods we've seen folks moving to, and it's a little bit particular in a custom job shop fashion, but we try to find something that's standard in your process and use standard work and the timetables associated with that to try to understand what the expected time is, so that you can take your cycle time and compare that to the tack time at which you're trying to deliver that product. Surely you've gone out and estimated a certain amount of work that needs to be done on that project, and you can compare that number you've originally quoted or given and compare that to what you estimate or think is going to happen on the shop floor. Looks like we have another question too. A couple coming in. Do you work with companies helping them work through this process? Is that from the same guest? Oh, no, it's a different guest. Yeah. So I mentioned the 3 to 5 day activity is something that the MEP Center would actually host on site with you. It starts with a site visit where we want to understand your needs and properly scope out the project. But then we're going to jump into it with you and spend multiple days on site with you, going through this process and leading you through the different steps. Looks like Thomas has asked, feel free to dismiss since it pertains more to the first part of lean, but what are some of the methods to determine what the customer actually wants so that we're not just speculating when value stream mapping? So some of the different methods we've seen in place are, well, first of all, a lot of times people are very close to their customers, so they can just pick up the phone and call them or ask them. We've seen things like a spec sheet. We've also seen things where you don't necessarily know who your particular customer is, where we've done interviews or focus groups where we've tried to understand what those needs are. A lot of times when you get into that realm, it's best to involve someone from like a marketing firm or a research firm that can gather some of that data in an unbiased way. Those are a couple examples of different ways that we've done it, but typically we've seen folks that have they just gather that information from their sales guys. Another question: can you go over the VSM symbols and why pull systems are essential? I think the easiest way to explain this is to go back to one of my earliest slides at the very beginning, and I'll quickly jump back there where we had like a finished value stream map. To quickly highlight some of the symbols that you see here, anytime you see a zigzag line, like at the top in the information flows, that's something electronic and a data portion being traveled. The triangles are queue stations or material buildup. Some of the symbols itself, you have cycle time or uptime. That's pretty common. You'll see those pieces of data in there a lot. A lot of times you'll see personnel also in that list, so number of people related to process A, process B, process C. And typically we don't try to involve too many symbols or like of the nomenclature, so that we can keep it generic and easy to understand. And why pull systems are essential. So this is something that is covered in our Lean 101 class as well, but pull system versus a push system is one of a very important lean concept where the customer is actually asking for it. They're pulling it all the way from the customer's standpoint, and that data or that information or product doesn't build up inventory on your end of things. See if there are any other questions. We'll be able to share a recording of this presentation with others in our organization. Absolutely. We record every one of these webinars, and we'll have that posted up on our website, on our YouTube channel, excuse me. And we'd be more than happy to send a link out to you if you want to follow up with us at a later date. We have another question that says, do you have any online learning resources for value stream map? Right now, the center itself just has the webinar here as a resource. Typically, these are really custom projects, and we try to make them as particular to your business as we can. So that's the reason why we typically do a site visit and can bring some material and share that with you in person. So really encourage you guys to reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to set up a visit, like I said, and come by and explain some of this in detail. So we'll leave our contact information up here just a little bit longer. But if no one else has any questions, thank you so much.